All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are learning more. Look at our brains growing. This is amazing. Okay, so guys, what I wanted to do in this video is talk about sort of the redefinition of what liberalism and conservatism means in the modern era, okay? This should look familiar. We have done this already. We've talked about classical conservatism, and we have spoken about classical liberalism. We talked about how classical conservatism was the first sort of way to organize society, right? Now, I know that there were empires long before this, right? But let's just say in the last 2,000 years or so, right? This is sort of like the first real way to sort of organize society. And I've mentioned this many, many times, but I want this to really make sure it sinks in. The idea of humans being reactions to things going on around them. And classical conservatism was a reaction to the fact that the world was this chaotic, unpredictable place where scary stuff happened and man couldn't explain it, but you had these individuals, kings, emperors, whatever you want to call them, who promised that as long as you give me your allegiance, I will protect you. And that was a good trade-off, right? That was a good trade-off. And with that, guys, we start to see feudalism. We start to see this divine right of kings idea. And that worked for a long time, as we've spoken about, up until we had the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, which made people smarter, to be honest, right? Through science and the scientific method, we figured out that a lot of the things that we thought were true were in fact not true, like the idea that the earth was flat, like the idea of the heliocentric model, all these things that we figured out, right? The earth-centric model. We figured out that the sun, in fact, was the center of our universe, okay? So guys, through science, we discovered all this new stuff, and then man started to apply that thinking to politics. All of a sudden, this divine right of kings idea became not so popular. And basically, man started to yearn for freedom from government, from totalitarian government. And that's what classical liberalism is all about. It's about freedom from government control. It's about government actually protecting your unalienable rights to life, liberty, property. And that worked awesome. It was way better than classical conservatism, right? It was better than living under an absolute autocrat who had all the power, until we get the Industrial Revolution, until we get the Great Depression, and we essentially change, guys, from classical liberal small government to modern liberal big government because of these two rather large instances of history, these case studies. So let's quickly go over modern liberalism, because this stuff, we should know it, okay? We should know what these two incarnations of either liberalism or conservatism is all about. Now, guys, ebb and flow of society. Classical conservative era, we changed to the classical liberal era because of science, right? The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and then we moved to the modern liberal era. Now, I want you to notice in both of these, we see the idea of liberalism and liberalism. So again, classical liberalism is freedom from government. Now, modern liberalism is freedom through government. And I'll explain that as we go through this. So I want you to understand, guys, that modern liberalism, this new version of liberalism, right, this modern interpretation of it, is born with FDR and the New Deal. Period, point blank. You absolutely 100% need to know that. If you don't know that, the course is going right over your head, okay? FDR is a giant in social 30. He's really, really important. So, guys, even before FDR, though, we had the Industrial Rev. And you should know, that embracement of classical liberalism led to, worker exploitation, long hours, lack of benefits, disease, child labor, all these really nasty things, okay? And then, guys, after that, we also get the Great Depression. So, guys, Great Depression you know, it starts kind of late 1920s, early 1930s, right? The stock market crash precipitated it, October 29th, 1929. And then in the 1930s, all of a sudden, boom, the tablecloth is pulled and the dishes go crashing and life is not so great in America anymore, okay? Now, guys, prior to the Great Depression beginning in the 1930s or the late 1920s, depending upon which source you look at, we had the 1920s, right? The so-called Roaring 20s, which again, you should have looked at already. The Roaring 20s was awesome in America, and small government worked at that time because people had wealth, they had security. But guys, once Europe had rebuilded after World War I, and America was now being challenged in terms of its economic supremacy and its production capacity, all of a sudden, that's when the rug is pulled out from underneath them. That's when the tablecloth is pulled and the dishes go crashing. You ever seen someone do that where they're like, okay, you know, they try to pull the tablecloth really quickly and, you know, sometimes it works and it's really cool, but sometimes just like crash, right? That was the Great Depression. So guys, there was a man in power from 1924. Sorry, let me just back up. From 1924 to 1929, there was an American president in power named Calvin Coolidge. And guys, Coolidge, he was a Republican, and Republicans in general believe in small government. After him in 1929, because he served one term, there's a man by the name of Herbert Hoover, and you would have seen or learned about Herbert Hoover in the last module, right, where it was looking at the birth of modern liberalism. So from 29 to 1933, we had Herbert Hoover, right, American president, served 4 terms, and he was also a Republican. He believed in small government. He believed in classical liberalism. So when the stock market crashed and the American economy started to be gutted, he believes in laissez-faire. And what do you do with the economy when you believe in laissez-faire? What do you do when you believe in capitalism, that is free market? You do nothing. When the economy is going great, you say yay. And when the economy is doing bad, you say, oh, you know what, that's too bad, but it'll sort itself out. Meanwhile, while it's sorting itself out, people are jumping off buildings, people are losing their businesses, people are losing their homes, children are going hungry, people are living in the streets, people are, you know, wearing newspapers on their feet for shoes, they're eating out of garbage cans, right? So guys, with this whole idea of like self-help, Americans grew tired of classical liberalism. So in 1932, Americans voted for a man by the name of FDR. Okay, FDR. So FDR's New Deal was a really big deal. Okay, so guys, the idea of modern liberalism is a belief in big government. So we go from small government under classical liberalism to big government. We typically associate the idea of modern liberalism with something known as the welfare state, where the state's job is to take care of you, to provide for you, to ensure you have things that you need to survive, like food, clothing, shelter, a job, you know, all these things. Now it's the state's role to ensure that that is something that you have. Remember, guys, under classical liberalism, the state had a much smaller role to protect your life, your liberty, your property. That is it. It was to be minimal. Now, because people are suffering, they wanted more government. So guys, basically, if you think of society like a pendulum, right, we go from big government under classical conservatism, and then it swings to small government under classical liberalism. Now we've gone back to big government, but I don't want you to think that it is a dictatorship, because it's not. What modern liberalism is, though, guys, is it is quasi-socialist, where you have government intervention in the economy, in society. It is, by definition, quasi-socialist. Government intervention is socialist by nature. So, guys, the welfare state is a socialist type of government. Now, I'm not saying full socialism where everyone's economically equal, but there's a number of social programs that attempt to make people's lives better. And it was in response to the Great Depression that we see this happening. Now, people who don't like this idea of the welfare state call it the nanny state. I'm going to talk to you about the nanny state, because while I think some government help is good, then I think that it emboldens government with more authority, and as government gains more authority, we the people lose less freedom, or we lose our freedom, and as a result it leads to sort of like almost like a soft type of tyranny, and we'll talk about that as and I'll show you examples of that as we move on in this module. So guys, welfare state is a positive connotation of the modern liberal state, like it's the state providing you with things that you need, whereas the nanny state is more of a negative connotation. People who are neoconservatives over here, and we'll talk about them in a sec, basically see the modern liberal state as a nanny state. So guys, the main way in which the modern liberal state helps you is through redistribution of wealth, which again sounds pretty socialist because it is. The government taxes the wealthy and passes that wealth to the middle class and the poor through social programs. And there we have it right there, FDR's New Deal. Guys, FDR's New Deal introduced large government to an America which had never seen this amount of government intervention in the economy. America was born as a rejection of government, but as times got bad enough in America due to the Great Depression, which, I mean, it's called the Great Depression not because it was great, because it was awesome, but because it was just so all-encompassing and huge, right? So FDR's New Deal, guys, becomes this government gains this role as sort of like a savior of the people. And you know what? It helps make people believe that things are going to get better. Social programs start to get people back to work. It doesn't get rid of unemployment. When the Great Depression started and when FDR took office in 1933 officially, American unemployment was about 25%. He brings it down to about 15%. Not great, but it's a heck of a lot better. That drop of 10% means millions more Americans are working again, and they start to feel optimistic and good about the way life is going. So we see social programs which expand the size and scope of government. And guys, I mean, there's other liberals today in America like Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a liberal, a modern liberal, as we would refer to him looking at it in this context. Obama with Obamacare, right? That's another social program that was created under President Obama, who was a modern liberal who tried to provide health care for all Americans, right? Hillary Clinton, another example of a modern liberal, right? And, you know, we see all Bernie Sanders, you could look at as a modern liberal, although you maybe would want to push him a little bit further and call him like a downright democratic socialist. But guys, the common theme amongst all these liberals is this belief that government is good. It's this belief that government should be walking hand in hand with you, not protecting life, liberty, property, and kind of staying back from you the way a parent kind of stays back from you if they believe that you're capable and you're autonomous. But now it is like a parent who walks hand in hand with you. And, you know, when you have a little bit of dribble on your lip, your chin, right? You're eating an ice cream, there's like some chocolate here, they come and wipe your mouth for you. You know what I mean? You fall down, they pick you up. So there's this belief, according to modern liberals, that the state is benevolent. It is good. Its job is to help you. Get off my screen. Okay, now, guys, let's talk really quickly about neoconservatism, okay? Also called modern conservatism, but we don't use the term modern conservatives. We say neo-conservatives, okay? So we have conservatism in the old age. Now we have conservatism in the new age. And here's where people get confused, right? I want you guys to understand neoconservatism was a reaction against modern liberalism, much like how classical liberalism was a reaction against classical conservatism. Each one of these things is a reaction to what came before it, okay? So neoconservatism, which began in the 1960s, I would argue, was a reaction against what people see as liberalism sort of run amok. Big government socialism run amok. So it says, neoconservatism was a reaction to the liberalization of society. And when we say liberalization, we talk about sort of like government getting involved in so many things, right? So many things, you know, civil rights movement, feminism, the hippies, the Vietnam War, all these things were going on in the 1960s, and society was radically changing. And all of a sudden people are saying, whoa, 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 this is going too far. They wanted to pump the brakes on it. They wanted to slow that change down. So these people who are sort of against these changes that were going on in the 1960s, well, who's against change? Well, conservatives are, right? As we should know at this point in the course. So guys, neoconservatives believe that the role of government is much like in the classical liberal state. I want you to understand, we go from big government to small government to big government, and now neoconservatives believe in small government. They don't like the welfare state. They worry about the power of the welfare state, or as they would probably call it more so, the nanny state. They believe that government is becoming too large and too intrusive, and that it needs to back off. That's what conservatives today believe. They believe in laissez-faire. They believe in, you know, this idea of small government, and government's role is only to protect those unalienable rights of life, liberty, and property. Otherwise, it should sort of back off. Because they believe, guys, that modern liberalism, that socialist or quasi-socialist government, robs people of initiative. It robs people of, to be honest, freedom, as it takes from them out of their pocketbook in the form of taxes and gives to those who are perhaps more idle and not as hardworking, right? So guys, they also believe that it creates a relationship of dependency where the state gains this immeasurable amount of power, and that puts the citizen in a dangerous position, because if you rely upon the government for handouts, then I mean, you're sort of like, and I use this metaphor sometimes, right? Like the drug dealer and drug addict. I mean, who is in need in that relationship? It is the addict who needs the drug dealer for their hit. Now, it's the government as the drug dealer. They're the ones that give you the welfare and everything that you need in society. And you are that person in that position of dependency who can't function without that government giving you what you need, okay? So, guys, there's a number of people who are major thinkers, and one that is always quoted by the American right today, by conservatives, is Ayn Rand, right? The UCP government here in Alberta, they are, by definition, a neoconservative government, and they believe, or at least they say they believe, in small government, right? They believe in free markets. Sure. So anyways, guys, Ronald Reagan in American history is considered to be probably sort of like the godfather of the American neoconservative movement. In Great Britain in the 1980s, we had Margaret Thatcher, who was a very much a neoconservative, who is very much a believer in small government. So what did Reagan and Thatcher do? They slashed social programs because they see social programs as creating dependency, which is not good for society. Either that, or they're sort of just heartless and they don't really care about poor people. I'll let you decide that. Okay. Anyways, Milton Friedman and Frederick Hayek are two other names in the neoconservative movement that we will look at, that we will talk about, that we will see when we look at the Chicago School of Economics later on down the road. So they believe in privatization. We've talked about that. To privatize means to take something that was run and owned by government and pass it on to the free market, because it believes that there's going to be increased efficiency and competition, which will then benefit the end consumer. Sounds like a cool idea. We also have deregulation, right? Removing red tape, as it's sometimes called. Here in Alberta, there's a so-called red tape reduction committee under the UCP. A reduction in the social safety net. We cut taxes for the rich, which means we cannot deliver the same level of social programs for the poor. So yeah, guys, so this bottom of the chart here, I would argue, is probably pretty important for you to understand. So we go from large government, which is totalitarian, to small government, which is limited, right? This is classical conservatism, to classical liberalism. Then we go from large government under modern liberalism, which is progressive in nature, right? Trying to make the world a better place. That idea of utopia being very, very important, or at least equality. And then we get under neoconservatism, we get back to small government that is limited. So classical liberalism and neoconservatism are two very similar ideologies. Just one existed back in the day and the other exists now. The one that exists now, of course, is neoconservatism. Modern liberalism and classical conservatism, there's some commonality there as well, because we see large government involvement in society. However, there's some important differences here. Under classical conservatism, it is a totalitarian, autocratic, feudal government with one person in power, whereas in modern liberalism, we have the idea of still a democratic government, but it is much larger in size and scope, right? So we see large government being sort of that uniting factor between them. So you go large to small again. And just so you guys know, if we talk about, you know, the way the world is today, the world today, guys, is sort of like this war of liberals and conservatives, right? Modern liberals and conservatives. People who are modern liberals believe in all the things that liberals believe in today, right? Gender, social safety nets, equality, all these things. Whereas conservatives today want to sort of, you know, back off from those ideas a little bit. They believe, instead of equality, they believe in meritocracy, which isn't always a flawed idea. Although, I mean, does everyone have equality of opportunity? You can make a pretty good argument that no, that is not the case. Okay, anyways, guys, hopefully that sort of helps you understand how liberalism has changed and how conservatism has changed over time. And if you have questions, I mean, let me know, right? Let me know. And as always, guys, peace. I love you. And then keep following. Click that next button down below, and then you'll see some examples of, here's my argument, guys. Modern liberalism was great, right? It helped a lot of people. But here's the thing. When government gains more authority, when government gains more power, it continually wants more power. And my argument is that perhaps modern liberalism, in fact, is the way it is today in the 2000s. Maybe modern liberalism is just actually, you know, these individuals who are sort of power hungry, who wear smiley faces and have beautiful hair, that want to actually control you because they don't think you know what's good for yourself. Maybe, in fact, they're sort of like classical conservatives who just believe that you can't do it on your own. So anyways, I'll see if you buy that argument, right? But I'm going to introduce you to some instances like Bill C-16 here in Canada, and other things that perhaps demonstrate that maybe modern liberalism needs to slow down a little bit. Maybe in the name of being progressive and woke, maybe it needs to slow down a little bit. Okay, maybe we need to go back to that idea of government not being as intrusive as it used to be. Okay, guys. Anyways, that's been long. I apologize, but I got lots to say because I'm very passionate about this topic. Love you guys as always. Peace, and we'll see you later.